Right. So, welcome to our second of the Designation rubric webinar series. Today, we are going to be discussing attribute number 2, which is curriculum and instruction. If you aren't already familiar with who I am, my name is Krista McQueen. I'm the STEM Relationship Manager with TSIN. I also manage our designation and our redesignation process. So I'm happy that you are here today to dive in and learn the nitty-gritty of attribute number 2. Attribute number 2 can feel overwhelming, but we really are excited that you're here so that we can help get you the support that you need as you move throughout. Just to give you a little bit of background knowledge, when we think about curriculum and instruction, this is truly the piece where you're showing off how your school is integrating PBL, so project-based learning or problem-based learning. And this is truly thinking about the interconnectedness of thinking about your Tennessee state standards and how you're able to connect those with science, technology, engineering, math, and the arts. So that's really what curriculum and instruction, that's really what the foundation is. If you have had a chance to look through our rubric, you know that each of our attributes have sub-attributes within each one. Curriculum and instruction has 7. So we'll start by talking about 2.1. 2.1 is our project-based and problem-based learning. So here, really to be a designated school, when we think about project-based and problem-based learning, a designated school has learning experiences that require students to thoroughly go through the process of the engineering design process. They have an inquiry and a knowledge building, and they're able to come up with solutions to develop those issues. So this really is an opportunity to promote how your students are having student-led experiences and are engaged in real-world content. So we're going to talk through 2.1 a little bit. We're going to look at the rubric, and then I'll provide you with some example pieces of evidence here. All right, so when we look at the rubric for 2.1, 2.1 is the frequency of PBLs being integrated into the content areas. So this is truly about how often your students are having an experience revolving around project or problem-based learning. And on our rubric, have early, developing, and accomplishing and model. These all end with a score from 1 all the way up to 4 being the highest when we think about putting a numerical value on it. Obviously, we want to strive to earn in that model status. So that's where I always like to focus. As schools go through this process, the department will only designate schools that earn 90% in that model range. So I always like to start out by focusing on the model as we go through. So in the model on the rubric, you'll see that the keyword is throughout. So units of PBL revolving around STEM or STEAM instruction is 1, allied to Tennessee state standards. It includes integrated content starting within science and math. Knowing that that's where naturally your PBLs are going to fit, but in that model status, trying to work in some ELA, some art standards where you can throughout the academic year. Typically in early, you'll see that it says once a year. So students are receiving a PBL experience one time throughout the year. You can see developing that happens twice. You can see accomplishing that it lists 3 quarters, and then model throughout. We typically see about 4 times a year, whether that's 2 in the first semester and 2 in the second semester, but that's typically on average what we see schools do to be considered throughout that academic school year. When we think about evidence for this piece, sorry, let me pull the chat over just in case people have some questions that I can't see. When we think about evidence for this piece, it's really short and long-term projects. We know that when we plan PBLs, there's really no right or wrong answer in how long that PBL lasts. It's really about the quality of the PBL So not necessarily thinking about whether this PBL is going to take me a week or this PBL is going to take me a month. And these PBLs, in order to be considered model, are happening throughout your school year, and they are student generated. So they are multidisciplinary, meaning that they are tied to more than one standard, and they truly are relevant to the real world. So thinking about a couple of different ways that you can showcase this, students are able to articulate the relationship among concepts. So being able to verbally describe a project or problem that they're working with, being able to present and investigate those findings, being able to engage in regular arguments, but we say that meaning, are they able to collaborate with other classmates appropriately? There are opportunities to interact with STEM or STEAM professionals. So being able to draw in those community and business partnerships into the point one piece where they are being able to interact with the student experience around PBL. And then there are opportunities for students to interact with museums, parks, national parks. Those are just some examples of different types of partners that could be involved when we think about 2.1. Evidence here, a couple of different things that you can showcase here when we think about evidence. So you can create a schedule of your PBL implementation that's happening school-wide. You can split that up by grade level, list an overview of those PBLs and link those PBLs in. PBL planning documents is another form of evidence that you could use here. So how teachers are actually planning for the PBL, whatever documents they use, whether they use the Foursquare planning model, whether you've adopted your own type of model. And then, of course, evidence of that PBL in action is always a solid piece of evidence. This can be pictures, this can be videos of students working through the project or the problem itself. So there are lots of different things that you can think about when it comes to evidence of the PBL in action. Here is just a snippet of a past application, and you can see here that they created a table, and in that table they listed the overview of the PBL description, what grade level it pertained to, how many students were impacted by that PBL, and then the actual PBL lesson plan was linked in. So that was able, and inside those lesson plans, you may be able to link all of these things that we've talked about, pictures and videos inside of that. So that's just one way to be able to showcase evidence examples there. Does anyone have any questions about 2.1 before I move into 2.2? All right, hearing none, we will move forward. So 2.2 is the engineering and design thinking process. And so here, this is where this truly becomes a part of your school's culture. Thinking about how students are able to articulate this process, whether they're in science, math, art, ELA, PE, being able to implement and think with this lens, being able to brainstorm, being able to design, being able to create, being able to test, and being able to recognize where they are in this process and use this academic vocabulary. When we look at the rubric for this, again, we look at the rubric, we still have the early developing, accomplishing, and model. And so here, the key word that's underlined in model is recursive nature. It's really important that our students understand that this process, this framework that we're ingraining into their minds, that they know that it is a process that they can go back and revisit at any point during the project or the problem. This is a fail forward approach. If you have a group of students that is designing a digital creation of some kind and they can't get the formatting to work and it's to the end, that just means that they didn't get there right then. knowing and understanding that they have the opportunity to go back and figure out where their formatting went wrong, what they need to do, what coding do they need to do. And that's the same thing when students are building a physical prototype. Thinking about that recursive nature, knowing that if it doesn't work the first time, it doesn't mean that they fail. And that's the great thing about the engineering design process, is it does lend the student the opportunity to refine and reflect and revisit this process. So really making sure that our students understand what this process is. If it's posted in the classroom, it's something that's referenced frequently, no matter what subject or what content the student is being led with. It is, in order for it to become a part of the school culture, that's really what it takes, is allowing it to become a part of the academic vocabulary, a part of something that you just reference as a check-in. So when we think about different types of evidence for this piece, there are lots of different things that we can think about when we think about evidence for the engineering design process. Collaborative projects are always a great way for us to be able to see how students are actually working through the engineering design process, seeing that they're working with other students. Student STEM science notebooks are another good way for us to physically see that students are brainstorming, that they're drawing out their plans, that they're illustrating, and that they're understanding these concepts that are being asked of them. Rubrics are another good example of being able to showcase that students have successfully kind of worked through the engineering design process or the design thinking process in order to master the content. There are lots of different rubrics out there pertaining to problem or project-based learning. Finding one that you can easily tweak from PBL to PBL is a really nice way to not reinvent the wheel. Student demonstrations is another great way to be able to showcase the EDP. If students are able to verbally give a presentation or have a presentation videographed where they're able to talk start to finish about the project or problem that they're working on and use this academic vocabulary, that's how we know that a student has truly mastered what the engineering design process represents. And now they understand that they can use that content in any context, no matter what subject they're in. So lots of different ways to showcase evidence for this piece. Here, again, I pulled another snippet. This particular school wanted us to see, one, the engineering design process that was adopted by their school that they were using in their classrooms. And they also wanted us to see an activity where we could see student work and student examples of how they were using the engineering design process. So lots of different things that you could think of to showcase evidence here when we think about the engineering design process. Again, it can be things like student notebooks, it can be things like student presentations, it can be rubrics, it can be pictures. So all kinds of different things to be able to showcase 2.2. But again, the end goal here for the engineering design process to truly come to life in your building, it really needs to become a part of the entire building's culture. So finding a framework that fits the needs of your students and the needs of your staff, and getting it in every classroom can really help build up that foundation of it becoming a part of your school culture. Anyone have any questions about 2.2? All right. Again, please feel free to come off mute after we go over each attribute and ask questions, or you can hold questions to the end. I am super flexible. We'll move into 2.3, which is the quality of technology integration. And so this is truly thinking about, it's really great when our students have the opportunity to access technology. A lot of our schools are fortunate enough to be one-to-one. Some of our schools are fortunate enough to have just a few pieces of technology for students to use. And it truly doesn't matter which category you may fall into or what category your school falls into. It's truly about how you're able to leverage and utilize that technology to the best of its ability, and how students are actually using those pieces of technology. Let's dive into it just a little bit when we look at the rubric and think about what this truly entails. So again, we're only going to focus on model here. And this model piece says that teachers embed varied technology into the instructional process. So that this can be lots of different things. This can be our Nearpods. This can be our Seesaw. This can be our Zooms. This can be our Skypes. So it's going to be the Skype with the scientist. All these platforms that we use to enhance our instruction and facilitate student learning will fall into this category. When we drop down and think about students using this varied technology in order to investigate processes, including virtual, computer-based, mobile, data collection devices, web-based lessons, computer applications, researching, reporting, communicating, collaborating. There are so many opportunities here for you to be able to showcase how students are using that technology. When we fast forward and think about evidence, there are times when our students create digital created designs, whether it's a Google slide or a PowerPoint or a Canva or a PDF, or they create a virtual presentation. All of these things can be used to be able to showcase how students are using that technology. And again, it does list several different types of technology. Sometimes that is a question, especially if a school is not one-to-one, thinking about all these other different components, whether it is mobile, like an iPad or a phone, or it is a data collection device. So there are plenty of different ways to be able to showcase that your students are using technology. And when we think about evidence for this piece, so we've talked through several different online-based instructional tools that we can use that's also student-driven. A couple of the websites that are the platforms that we talked about, Nearpod, Seesaw, all of those have interactive pieces for the student to be able to integrate into that classwork. Probes, if you have the opportunity to have probes where you can use them to collect data. Tablets, graphing calculators, 21st century technology tools, teachers and students receiving ongoing access and opportunity to expand using that technology. So it is one thing for our students to have technology. It's another thing for students to understand how that technology works and how they can appropriately operate it. So lots of different ways that you can showcase here. And remember, if you joined us for Attribute 1, we did talk about the number of artifacts. And although that we provide lots of different samples and lots of different ways that you could showcase this, remember the application will ask you to upload 1 to 3 pieces of evidence. Of course, you are free to upload more, but just kind of keep that in mind. We always try to provide plenty of opportunities for you to think about what pieces of evidence would best showcase what that attribute actually entails. Rob, I'll go ahead and let you ask your question. You're muted.
I was wondering if a training related to the bottom, it says about expanding their proficiency in technology use, if that could be mentioned in this section, but also in, I think it's 5.1, maybe professional development, or can it only be used in one section?
That's a great point that you bring up. So when we think about evidence, evidence can be used more than once. So if we put in training here that teachers have received some type of technology training and we want to put it again in 3.1, which is where it talks about teacher training, then we can certainly use it again. My advice that I like to give schools is if we're using a piece of evidence more than once, specifically, let's say that I want to use a PBL more than once, I always recommend to schools that they highlight specifically what they want the reviewers to see out of the PBL that particular time. So it's one thing if I upload PBL in 2.1, obviously I want the reviewer to look at it as a whole. But let's say that I want to use it again in 2.4 or 2.2 for the engineering design process. I might actually highlight in that lesson plan where it talks about the students using the engineering design process. But you can use evidence more than once. So that was a great question. Thank you for that. All right, so a couple of sample pieces here. We have a Nearpod where we can see that students were interacting with a problem they were assigned, and then there was a Skype with a scientist, and that screenshot was attached as well. Any more questions about 2.3, which is integration of technology? All right, we will roll right into 2.4, which is exploring STEM or STEAM careers. And this is truly about how we're able to provide experiences and exposure for our students around the possibility of them, and hoping that they take a path that has a STEM or STEAM connection, and making sure that we provide those opportunities for our students. So you're going to see on the rubric here for model, it specifically says that students are receiving monthly exposure. And I think this happens a lot more naturally than schools think. It goes from once, twice, quarterly to monthly. A couple of things that I always like to point out here, when we think about career exposure, our minds immediately go to things like career fairs. Career fairs are great. They can open up doors and opportunities for students that they may not receive otherwise. It is an event that typically happens one time a year. So we also want to think about other things that we're doing in our building that elevate and support the student outside of that one-time event. So here, when we think about evidence, really thinking about showcasing a variety of different things that your school is doing to support students around this aspect, to show that it is things that happen just outside of one-time events. So here, particularly in model, it says that students explore careers, including STEAM and STEAM careers, professional activities, and employability skills. So this is thinking about our soft skills. So lots of different things that we can go for here for evidence. Our guest speakers, our field trips, our internships or externships that our high school students may have, or even our middle school students may have. Also, just our lesson plans. There are always opportunity to build in just to our normal everyday lesson plans of being able to connect the content that we're teaching to a specific career. Especially because our students always want to know why do I have to know this? And making a point to say, if this is the career that you're interested in, if this is the career path that you want to take, this is why you need to know this. So having that opportunity to just plug it into your daily lesson plans can help hit this mark as well. There's lots of different things here. I'll just highlight a couple of those because some of them we've already talked about. We've talked about shadowing. We've talked about field trips or tours. We've talked about speakers. We mentioned career fairs, but this is also even our partnerships with our local community colleges or our local museums, our local libraries, any of our organizations within our community that have a big tie to our school. And also thinking about the free platforms that we offer through our relationship with the Department of Ed. We offer Define Learning, which is free 5-8. We offer Define Careers, which is free K-12. And we offer Elevate Tennessee, which is geared towards 8 through 12, but it doesn't necessarily have a particular limit. It is an open platform that anyone could sign up for. So when we think about these three platforms, they can also help us utilize this monthly exposure. All of those three platforms that I talked about, that's the last bullet on this slide. All of those platforms are a way to supplement, a piece of being able to tie in careers to that. So a couple pieces here: photos, videos, programs, presentations, all work really nice when we think about the type of evidence to submit here. The sample that I had to show you was a STEM Career Expo. Again, this was just one piece of evidence that I chose to pull, so you can see that there are multiple different experts that came in and spoke with kids. Again, pictures are always really nice. If you have a picture and you're always, sometimes I get, well, how can we make sure that you're seeing what you want us to see out of this picture? Never feel bad for adding a little blurb or a caption at the bottom of the pictures. You can never oversell your school enough when you're going through this process. So I always tell schools that if they have any fear, go ahead and add a caption so that you know exactly what you want your reviewers to see. Any questions about 2.4, which is exposure of STEM and STEAM careers? All right, we will move forward. We have made it to 2.5, which is college and career readiness. So here talks a lot about the employability skills checklist. So I definitely encourage you link on our rubric. It's also a quick Google search. It's the Tennessee Department of Education's employability skills checklist. This piece focuses pretty heavily on that. It's mentioned in the rubric. And when you take a peek inside of that employability skills checklist, it really has a heavy emphasis and a heavy focus on the 4 C's. So let's dive into what the rubric actually entails for this piece. So when we look at this, it talks about how the lessons that we're creating, the PBLs that we're creating, are tied to the employability skills checklist. So is there a presence in that lesson plan of students having the opportunity to communicate, to be creative, to collaborate, to critical think? It says that lesson and activities require students to ask questions, define problems, analyze, and interpret data. So this is also bringing back in that engineering design process. Are we offering opportunities for this? The lesson activities require students to effectively communicate and collaborate with their peers. And this does take some time to really develop this culture inside of your own classroom. Lots of times, especially at the elementary level, even in the middle school level, even in the high school level, we get a group of kids together, we pair them up, and you're walking around listening to the conversations, and it might not be the conversations that we want to be hearing. So making sure that we provide support to those students so that they understand how to appropriately respond, especially when they're sharing ideas or in that brainstorming phase. You know, always going in with the preference that no idea is a bad idea. So just making sure that our students have that opportunity to work through that. Lessons and activities require students to collect evidence, revise their thinking, interpret data. So again, we're thinking about the engineering design process. Are we making sure that they know that it's a recursive nature and they can go back and revise their thinking? And then lessons and activities require students to have time management. I think as teachers, we have to be very in tune with our time management. And as students take on PBLs, making sure that we're also modeling and practicing that piece too. Knowing that all of these things that we've talked about, they all tie back in to a student being a successful employee in the real world. And that's why it's tied back into that employability skills checklist. We know that employers, want workers who are going to show up on time, who are able to time management, who are able to solve problems, and who are able to be team players and collaborate. So this particular attribute really supports making sure that our students are college and career ready. All right, so evidence for this, lots of different things again. All of these kind of work towards lesson planning. So being able to show all of these things that we've talked about, being able to show that they're collaborating, being able to show that they're aligned with that employability skills checklist. It's highly recommended, again, that if you haven't peeked into the employability skills checklist, that you print it out for your staff. Put it in your teachers' mailboxes or dive into it during a faculty meeting, making sure that they are familiar with it and know exactly what those 4Cs are and how to truly collect them and collaborate with them within inside a PBL. Again, we really want our students to be ready for the workforce, whether they're going to move on and go to college and get a degree and then go out into the workforce, or they're immediately going to go into the workforce. Either way, we need to be making sure that we prepare our kids with these hard and soft skills. And this is an opportunity in this particular attribute to showcase that. The examples here, so obviously I can't physically open these pieces up because we can't data. We don't want to breach any type of security here. But for this particular school, they uploaded a particular project where we were able to see that students were using the 4Cs. We were able to see that students were using these soft skills and these hard skills to communicate. They uploaded a video, several different videos of students in groups actually working through the design process. There were videos of students actually presenting that, being able to verbally speak to that. So opportunities here really revolve around the student experience. So lesson plans, pictures, videos, projects, or problems that students are solving. And again, we can use evidence more than once. I'll repeat that. So if you have something that you've already said that you want to use in another attribute, by all means, if it highly supports and fits this attribute, then you can use it again as well. Questions about 2.5? All right. We will roll into 2.6. So 2.6 is the integrity of academic content. So basically, this is a lot of words, right? Basically, are our standards aligned to what we're asking our students to do? Our rubrics, our assessment, how we're assessing whether our students have mastered that, is it all aligning? If I have a particular PBL that I'm planning and it has to do around weather, and I've put a plant life cycle standard in there, obviously we know that those things aren't aligned. So this is truly thinking about our standards, making sure that we are using them with fidelity and monitoring and having accountability. So when we look at the rubric, again, we're only going to focus on model. It talks about specifically that academic content is tied to multiple content standards. So again, naturally, we want to start with science and math, and then being able to bleed into science and ELA and even art. You do have the opportunity to select whether you want to be STEAM or STEM. And I think a lot of times we're just unfamiliar with what some of those standards are. So taking some time to familiarize yourself with those standards. Lots of times, familiarizing yourself with those art standards, you'll realize that you'll be able to highlight several of them in PBLs. Also, we want to think about our students working through a big idea or a foundational skill. We know that our foundational skills or our big ideas are kind of our hot standards, standards that we hit multiple times throughout the year. We do have standards that we teach where we may only hit once a year, but we also have several hot standards that we're going to hit multiple times throughout our school year, because they are those foundational skills that students need before they move on to the next grade level. Really here, when we think about submitting evidence for 2.6, the classroom evidence being making sure that it is student-centered and students are asked to think in complex ways. Really here, the easiest way to be able to showcase that you're tying multiple standards, that your lesson plans or the activities that you've designed for your students to do align to those standards are lesson plans, your PBLs. Which is the piece of evidence that I have here, a snippet of a PBL. I can see the project plan. I can see the standards that were highlighted, the different standards that were used, and I can also see how students were reflecting. I just pulled that out for you. So making sure, again, and I can also say that this is a school-wide. So follow-up questions that may occur when we see school-wide PBLs. So that's tied to, this says K-8. So essentially I should see several different standards here, or I should see a different lesson plan for each standard or for each grade level, knowing that each grade level is going to be doing something different because each grade level has different foundational skills that they're working through. So just keep that in mind too. Questions about 2.6. So again, 2.6 is really all about how we're tying our standards into our PBLs. Are we able to tie in more than one standard? And are we making sure that the standards that we're asking our students to learn, the activities are supporting that as well? All right, last but not least, we have made it to 2.7. So 2.7 is our enrichment learning activities. So really, this is just an opportunity to showcase all of the activities and experiences and offerings that you have for students that revolve around STEM or STEAM. These opportunities can happen before, after, or during school hours. And even this blurb kind of highlights several different things that you could think of that may be happening in your building that you could showcase here. We'll go ahead and take a look at the rubric for this specific example. When we look at model, so it says the school offers extracurricular activities that are engaged by most of the students. Lots of times we have clubs that are maybe only offered to a specific grade level. And if that's the case, those are wonderful. Make sure that you highlight those as well. But there are also opportunities that may be open to the whole school, but only some of those students participate, especially when we think about competitions, or we think about expos, or we think about science fairs. Those type of opportunities are typically open school-wide. So making sure that we are being mindful in the opportunities and offerings, making sure that we are opening those up to students. Also in model, you'll see most of the students participate in STEM or STEAM competitions, on-site, online exhibits, and in state and national forums. So lots of times we see schools or districts hold their own competitions where, in fact, I've seen it to where these type of competitions replace the traditional science fair, where students are given a problem on the spot to solve, and they work through that together. There are tons of state and national STEM competitions out there. A lot of those have to do with robotic teams. You know, if you don't have a robotic team and it's something that you're interested in, there are tons of grant opportunities out there. It just takes some time to research through those, but there are tons of opportunities out there for you to attempt to get some free money and some free robots or anything like that. Evidence, tons of different evidence, because every school is going to have all kinds of different options. This is just a blanket list. This doesn't mean that your school has to be doing these. It doesn't mean that your school might be doing something else that is different. These are just ones that we can think of off the top of our head. So it's always nice to see when schools share with us an activity or opportunity that they're offering that we've never thought of. So again, definitely not limited to all kinds of things that you could offer for students. And remember, these offerings can happen before, during, and after school. You can see that we do have defined learning and defined careers on there. That's something that can happen during the school day. It's a supplemental platform that revolves around STEM and STEAM. And that is a supplemental extracurricular experience for students. So lots of different things. When we move into actually the application, this is straight out of the application. This piece or this part 2.7 is a pre-made table, and you're simply filling in the program or the activity that you provide for your students, a little bit of an overview about that, the grade levels that are involved, and then the number of students that participate in that particular piece. So lots of times, now that we are integrating in the arts and offering schools the opportunity to become a STEAM school, lots of times we get questions about what that actually looks like. In our rubric, under each attribute, we do provide an opportunity for you to see some STEAM characteristics that can match up to that attribute, if that's something that you're thinking of. But when we think about the rubric as a whole, you want to think about integrating the arts into your short and long-term PBLs. Think about implementing it into that engineering design process. Think about implementing it into the careers. So, in 2.4, when we're talking about exposing our students to different types of careers, are we expanding that to showcase careers from the arts? Are we expanding it to talk about theater, makeup design, or hair? There are lots of, or cosmetology, I guess is a more appropriate word. There are lots of different things out there that will fall under the umbrella of art, and being able to be creative about how we flood those in and flow those into our lesson plans. But again, on the rubric, it does break it up by characteristics after each attribute. So you'll have to scroll down until that attribute is over. It will not be on the rubric under each sub attribute. So for attribute number 2, which is curriculum instruction, you need to get through all of the sub attributes before you see the STEAM characteristics. And that's the same for all of them. All right, well, I'm going to stop talking. We have about 10 or so minutes left, and I would love to be able to take any questions that you may have. Again, I'm here to support, open to questions. I can figure out how to stop sharing. There it is. Perfect.